2025 at 5 p.m. and will close at Friday, August 15, 2025 at 5 p.m. or until all slots are filled. Advanced registration during this period is available by the following methods: cpsboe.org or by phone. The public participation segment of the public hearing will conclude after the last person who has registered to speak has spoken, or at 2:30 for the first hearing on August 19 and 6 p.m. for the second hearing on August 19, whichever occurs first. Members of the public may submit written comments related to the FY26 tentative budget via the written comments form on the board's website at cpsboe.org or mailed to 42 West Madison Street, Garden Level by 5 p.m. August 20, 2025. Dated at Chicago, Illinois, August 13, 2025 by Sean B. Harden, President, attested by Susan J. Naranjo, Secretary. I would like to note for the record the members present here today: Board Member Lozano, Board Member Smith, Board Member Lopez, Board Member Boyle, Board Member Pope, Board Member Rosenfeld, Board Member Rivas, Board Member Rio Sierra, Board Member Brown, Board Member Bannon, Board Member Gutierrez, Board Member Biggs, Board Member Blaze, Board Member Sakor, President Harden, Dr. Macklin King, Interim Superintendent, Chief Executive Officer, Elizabeth K. Barden, Acting General Counsel, and Charles Mayfield, Chief Operating Officer.
Right, we're ready to begin today's public comment segment. Thank you for joining to share your comments with the board in compliance with the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Public participation, sometimes referred to as public comment, is the portion of the board meeting or hearing that grants district stakeholders the opportunity to address the board with their concerns and comments. Note that public participation is the time for the board and CPS senior leadership to listen and hear from you, rather than a time for dialogue with board members during or after your remarks. While we can't discuss personnel matters, public participation is a key component of transparent governance, and it provides us as board members as well as senior leadership an opportunity to listen to everyone who has signed to speak. The board takes equity of voice seriously. While we may not address your comments directly during public participation, CPS leadership is always present at our meetings and are always able to address concerns as follow-ups after the meeting. As a district and as a board, we also have many other spaces for authentic dialogue. For example, each and every one of our board members hosts board office hours so that we can have a conversation. We invite you to use our website, cpsboe.org, if you want to meet with the board member during office hours. We encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to meet with our members outside of board member meetings. Thank you for your attention and consideration. And as a reminder, union representatives will be allotted 5 minutes to speak before public participation, and any elected officials will be allowed to speak 5 minutes after the conclusion of public participation. Assistant Secretary, please share the rules of public participation.
For the record, I would like to state that Vice President Olga Bautista has joined virtually at 1:10 p.m. Members of the public who registered to speak were given the option to attend in person or via an electronic format. For those who prefer to attend via an electronic format, they were given information to access this meeting by dialing a number and using their phone. We did this so that speakers with limited or no access to the internet or who may have a weak internet connection could still participate using their phones. Also, members of the public may submit written comments for the Board of Education hearing via the written comments form on the board's website at cpsboe.org or mailed to 42 West Madison Street, Garden Level. Written comments received between the day the public agenda was posted through 5 p.m. the day after the Board of Education hearings will be submitted to the board and published within 5 business days on our website at cpsboe.org. Speakers, please listen while I provide directions for public participation. I will call your name and number when it's your turn to speak. For speakers joining us virtually, as a reminder to unmute, please press *6. Once you hear your name, please state your name for the record. I will then start the 2-minute timer. When there are 30 seconds remaining, I will inform you so that you can proceed to conclude your remarks to allow for the next speaker to begin. For anyone standing with a speaker, know that in order to comply with the city fire code, please stand along the glass partitions on the marked spots to keep aisles clear. Thank you. President Harden, before we begin calling registered speakers from the speakers list, we do have union reps who would like to address the board. We will begin with Dr. Diane Castro, CTU Financial Secretary, who is here in person.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Diane Castro, and I am the Financial Secretary at the CTU. I am here, though, with a few different lenses. Union leader, yes. Also as a parent and an educator on leave. For 18 years, I welcomed preschoolers to their classrooms, just like many of our colleagues did yesterday and preschool today. In order to make the school year one that I believe students deserved and provided a sense of peace to our parents, I will take my summers to plan, reflect, and purchase items, the resources for my classrooms, so that my students were given opportunities that their families traveled miles to provide for them. I was a bilingual preschool teacher, proudly to say. We do this with love. We do this with our own money. Educators know how to do this, and they do this with limited funds over the summer. This is all to say that for decades, our district has been run with limited monies allocated to our schools, either based on the financial mismanagement of your predecessors or based on the budgetary constraints created by Illinois, taking more than it gives back to our students. Regardless, as an alumna, as a parent, as a union official, it is clear as day that we have to send a message to our students and their families that we will take every step to avoid potential cuts or furloughs. That means being prepared, not just being hopeful. For those of us who have been observing the budget process, it has been feared that families and communities agree that there should be no cuts. And I was heartened to hear that this was a position you all took also. Yet, at this point, I am grappling with the three versions of the CPS budget that we have been presented with. The budget that was released just last Thursday echoes with Pedro Martinez's old playbook. While there were many and multiple assurances that this plan is sound, I did not hear where reality checks this work. Most parents know how to make things work for their families. The working class knows how to stretch their money when they can and to borrow when they cannot. You believe you have a budget plan that does not necessitate borrowing. Most parents do not think that about having to borrow either. Yet, we do. We do that if we absolutely have to, and to refuse to include a backup as part of your plan is to close your eyes to the reality that you just may have to, just like our parents do. We also heard a budget where 6 members of this board co-signed a budget plan that says yes to cutting SICAs, yes to cutting crossing guards, and yes to eliminating hot lunches for our children. As a parent of children who already struggle with CPS lunches, let me tell you, that's one that I take seriously. I sat aghast as I heard multiple members of this board refuse to have an actual backup plan to guarantee our paraprofessionals their pensions. My mother is a retired paraprofessional. I could not have even been as successful in my work in the classroom without my right hand, my paraprofessional, who happily retired just last school year. Our school's very foundation is based on the work and efforts that these members provide. Yet, that proposed budget will not account for the reality that this payment must be paid. You heard me speak about members financing their own classrooms. Is the message you want to say, not only do you get to spend money out of your pocket to support your classes, but we also won't invest in you retiring with dignity and the respect that you have earned. And we also heard from 11 members of this board that have said to give our students a fighting chance and a plan that has preparedness built in. We have all heard about the money that CPS is owed. Yes, owed. Our district has never been fully funded, and it's time for that to change. Don't fight with each other about how to cut, and especially to cut what our children need most. Fight together for the full funding our students deserve. I thank these 11 members for being realistic as we all work to Trump-proof this
30 seconds
district.
remaining, please conclude.
It is more evident now than ever that we must continue to do so. The investment is most crucial now. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next union rep is Caroline Rutherford, CTU Charter Division Vice Chair, who is here in person.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Caroline Rutherford, and I am the vice chair of the Charter Division for CTU. It's good to see you all again. I know you had a very busy summer working on the CPS budget, and we thank you for your hard work. And I think we all can agree that our students need more funding. It is not fiscal responsibility to ensure that students pay the price of any future budget challenge through devastating mid-year cuts and furloughs. It is not ethical financial leadership for a school district to slam the door on any borrowing that may be needed. And it is not acting like a responsible employer to balance a budget by choosing not to make the required employer pension payments for your lowest paid employees, the classroom assistants, clerks, and others who hold our schools together. It's not enough to say someone else should pay for your employer's retirement and hope for the best, leaving those workers' futures in jeopardy. The budget the previous CEO presented refuses to pay paraprofessional pensions, cuts hot lunches and custodial services, and banks on uncommitted funds from the city, state, and philanthropy. And this budget is unacceptable and should not even be considered. Do you want to be responsible for eliminating what could be a student's only hot meal for the day? Our schools are already in need of more custodial services. Do you want to be responsible for eliminating the jobs that keep our schools safe and clean for students? Pensions are lifelines for our paraprofessionals. Do you want to stand on the side of history that says these hardworking essential staff do not deserve retirement benefits? If you answered no to any of those questions, you cannot consider this budget. We need a budget that does not rely on cuts as a backup option. We need a budget that puts students and families first. This board took the responsible approach last year when it came to the Acero school closures by voting yes to the resolution to maintain those schools. You did not vote yes because it was the cheapest option. I think we all can agree on that, but because it was the best option for the students and the communities that you represent. I was surprised to see board member Rivas attending a press conference for the Acero Santiago School, considering you did not join the majority of this board in voting yes to keep our schools open. Instead, you abstained from that vote. It seems now you've changed your mind about the importance of prioritizing students with CPS funds. Please vote today in favor of students and not wait 6 months again to change your mind. We have to put students first always. So we're going to need this board to continue to take responsibility and provide our schools with a budget that allows for additional revenue and borrowing if we need it. A budget that provides the best school day for our students and does not involve cuts mid-year or furloughs. We are owed money by the state of Illinois. Just because they refuse to pay does not mean we take it out on our students and staff. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. For the record, Board Member D. Berry joined the board hearing at 1:20 p.m. in person. Up next, we have Union Rep Tremaine Reeves, SEIU Local 73, Director of the CPS Division, who is here in person.
Good morning, President Hardin, board members, and Dr. King. Months ago, this board passed a resolution detailing the qualifications of a CEO for Chicago Public Schools moving forward. When former CEO Pedro Martinez left the district at the close of the most recent school year, SEIU sent a letter stressing the need for a fair process and our hope for the most qualified person to fill the role of interim CEO for Chicago Public Schools. The mayor's office chose who they thought was the best qualified in Dr. Macklin King. Since then, Dr. King dove right in, hosting community meetings where parents and labor partners were able to voice their concerns surrounding the budget deficit, layoffs of frontline staff of multiple unions, respective members, and the impact of those decisions that they have on those students. In her proposed budget, Dr. King was thoughtful of all of those factors and presented a budget that does not call for additional cuts to schools or the front-facing staff, nor reimbursing the city for the pension payment, as both of those options would have immediate and long-term devastating outcomes for students and workers. Now let's talk about gambling. There are some that are calling for the district to reject the proposed budget that was presented by the CEO that the mayor felt was, again, the mayor felt is the most qualified to do this job, and have the budget that includes taking out a high-interest loan to balance the district's deficit. So number one, there's no guarantee that the district would even get approved for a loan. And if they did, what would be the plan to balance next year's budget while also having to repay the loan plus interest? Here's what history has taught us. More staff will be laid off. Those that are not laid off will face salary freezes and furlough days. The city of Chicago has a budget deficit north of $1 billion. There is no way for the city to pass their budget without declaring a TIF surplus. Any threat that TIFs will be withheld is an empty threat and untrue. CPS is owed money from both the city and the state and should not take out a loan. For months, SEIU Local 73 has been calling for leadership during this budget crisis. Dr. King, your proposed budget shows us that you care about students and their continuity of learning. You care to listen to parents, you care to listen to workers and labor partners' concerns. The mayor's office deemed you to be the most qualified for this job. Your budget shows that you have the courage to do what's right on this issue. This is the type of leadership that the children, the parents, and workers of Chicago Public Schools are looking for to run CPS. Any vote against your budget is irresponsible and dangerous, as it shows a willingness to gamble the quality of education for the students of Chicago. As long as you're doing the right thing, you have a friend in SEIU, Dr. King. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for your comments. For the record, Board Member Custer has joined the hearing at 1:23 p.m. in person. President Harden, we are now ready to call registered speakers from the speakers list. We will start off with Vicki Willis, speaker number 1, who's here in person.
I'm ready, because I'm going to cry it regardless. You can start the timer. I'm going to cry regardless. I'm just going to push straight through it. My name is Vicki Willis, and I'm here as a parent of Jalen Pleasant, who attends Boucher Elementary in South Shore. I'm a retired CPS teacher. I just retired from the board in 2022. I started in 2003. I worked at Bogan High School, and then I also worked at Jefferson Alternative School, which is located inside of the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center. I'm here to represent my son, Altrick Pleasant, who was a Chicago Public School student. And when you all started cutting the budgets, I am a witness of what happens to the pipeline to prison for special education students. My son, Altrick, was failed when those budget cuts went through. He was attending Dodge Elementary and Near North Elementary, and now CPS is facing laying off special education teachers and classroom assistants. And I lived through it, of what happens when the budget is cut. My son is not with me anymore. And I represent the group of people. When you cut
You have
the
30
budget,
seconds, please conclude.
I'm trying. When you cut the budget, bad things happen to those individuals like my son and my grandson who need those self-contained classrooms and the resources and the teachers that go with it. So I implore you to please think of us who are out here. Justice for Altrick Pleasant. Amen.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Catherine Jones, who's joining us virtually. Please press *6 to unmute yourself. Catherine Jones, please press *6 to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Can you
Yes.
hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon, Board President Harden and distinguished other board members and CEO Ms. King. I am a local school council member, Councilman Jones, at Frederick Douglass High School for over 25 years. I have been an advocate LSC PTA member, and I am calling in on advocating for our children. Ms. King, I applaud you for what you have stepped in and did. Community meetings, I applaud you. We have to consider our children. I applaud the young lady that came on 3 minutes ago. This is what's hurting. All of our schools need, some of our schools need more resources, which is mine. And I've been advocating for Douglas for years, and we all been advocating the community. And that's what we need, more resources for our children from pipeline to prison. It's very serious, you all. I'm going to say this. I'm going to pray that you all board members can come together what's best for all schools. I applaud you, you all, the members that fought and gave the Sustainable School for Austin. That's my son alumni school. And I applaud that for you all doing that. Now, what are you all going to do with Douglas? Are you all going to help us do the same thing to get more children at Douglas? Because it's being sabotaged, you all. I call in to say that with a heavy heart today. We are being sabotaged, not letting students coming in. And there needs to be an investigation done. I'm not going to let this go because the teachers are doing the best they can.
Remaining. Please conclude.
Thank you. They're doing the best they can with what little that we have. Douglas need more investment. I keep saying this, and keep saying this. And advocating for this school, and we will not let it go. So board members, please take heed today. Douglas, Frederick Douglass, 543 North Waller. We need more resources. And stop this, whatever sabotage, whoever's sabotaging, I don't know if it's downtown or what, but somebody is sabotaging this school. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak. Thank you all.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is LaMonica McKinney, speaker number 3, who's here in person.
Good afternoon. My name is LaMonica McKinney, and I'm a parent of 3 CPS students, 2 at Murray Language Academy and 1 at Kenwood Academy. I'm the vice chair of the Parent Advisory Council at Murray, and I'm also a parent mentor coordinator with the Parent Engagement Institute, which allows parent mentors to go into the classrooms and administer services and do an internship while successfully allowing the students to succeed during their daily studies. It's a community-based organization. While the parents volunteer inside the classrooms, most of the students that they work with during the day are students that are on a IEP or 504 plan. It is very hard for the students to go about their daily studies and basically function on a normal basis within the general education setting because there is a lack of seekers and teacher assistants due to budget cuts and funding in the school. While supporting my parent mentors in the classroom, I observed that the students suffer tremendously by not having the appointed paraprofessionals and seekers to help them adapt due to the budget cuts. You continue to cut the funding for the CPS students with special needs requiring mandated support from the state of Illinois. This is unacceptable to the parents and students of CPS. Please stop cutting the funding that the students need in order to successfully succeed in life. I'm asking that you pass the $1.6 million budget to ensure that the students of CPS
You have 30 seconds remaining. Please
receive all the
conclude.
resources they deserve from the Chicago Public Schools. Also, the
The students' environment is suffering tremendously due to the budget cuts for the custodial positions. Yesterday was the first day of school, and there was a rodent on the Murray Language Academy campus in front of the students as they presented to go into the school at the beginning of the day. Please stop cutting the funding so that the students can receive the custodial, SQL, and paraprofessional services that they need. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker is Bridget White, speaker number 5, who's here in person.
Good afternoon, Board President Harden, board members, and Dr. King. My name is Bridget White, and I'm with the Parent Engagement Chicago Coalition, PEAK, comprising of 19 Chicago-based organizations who partner with 154 CPS schools, voicing our strong opinion to any cuts that directly and indirectly impact the quality of education afforded to the elementary school students within CPS. Every day, our parent mentor program serves in schools and classrooms and witnesses firsthand the impact budget cuts have done to our children and students. In addition, we are working hard to build ladders of opportunity, the parent mentor to the paraprofessional career pipeline, and we demand more respect and job security for our seekers and our paraprofessionals. In the last couple of weeks, we've asked our parents what cuts have they been happening at their schools. And what we've heard is school after school in all parts of the city, they tell us 4, 5, even 7 seekers have been cut from their local school budgets. Schools are being forced to reduce the number of classrooms per grade level from 3 to 2, resulting in overcrowding classrooms. Significant cuts within special education staff, which makes it completely unrealistic to meet the needs of students with IEPs. Significant cuts within our school security, maintenance, and lunch programs. Schools have discontinued their hot lunch programs. Schools
You have
are
30
not
seconds
focusing
remaining.
on
Please conclude.
Safe Passage program workers that have experienced significant reduction in hours. Some told that their positions will be completely eliminated. We have significant concerns about the impact proposed budget of $126 million savings from the classroom and we will have on our students. We demand transparency of the breakdown of that $126 million of savings and strongly oppose any cuts that may directly impact the quality of education for our students. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Up next, we have Speaker Baltasar Enriquez, speaker number 6, who's here in person.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Baltasar Enriquez. I'm the president of the Little Village Community Council. It's a pleasure being here today. Little Village has been in the news a lot lately, especially what's going on in Little Village High School, where children are being sexually abused, where CPS failed to protect a student at Farragut while she got raped. But we never got no counselors. We never got anybody to come and speak to the children. And this is something that goes on in Little Village because they're Mexicans. Who cares? So we've been fighting to get more funding for bilingual teachers because we have a lot of newcomers, asylum seekers. We've been asking for our cluster program to get more funding because our children with special needs are the most vulnerable. And we've been ignored. They told us, talk to your representatives. We talked to Ms. Emma Lozano, and we talked to our network, but nothing gets done. Everything, gets shoved under the rug, and we're still being ignored. And then with the budget cuts, we're going to get more ignored. So here we are again, begging you guys to do something about it. And this has been going on since I was a kid. He's been addressing this issue since I was a kid, and it's still not addressed. So we're asking you guys to please, Little Village is one of the neighborhoods that produces more taxes than any other neighborhood, but yet we get crumbs. We don't get the services that we deserve. We always get ignored. So I'm
You
asking
have
the
30 seconds
board
remaining. Please conclude.
to do something about it. Bring us the tools, bring us the resources so our kids could succeed. Our kids don't even know how to read. That's why we're asking for literacy teachers. Our kids are not at par with other neighborhoods. So again, I'm asking you to help us solve the problem in Little Village. And again, our neighborhood is on fire, and all we have is a bucket of water. And that's a shame that we have a lot of Latino representatives. We have people that have
Thank you for your
experience
comments. Please
and yet
conclude.
still keep ignoring us. Well, thank you so much for your time. Gracias.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Hal Woods, speaker number 7, who's here in person.
Good afternoon, Board President Hardin, Vice President Batista, and members of the board, and Dr. King. I'm Hal Woods with Kids for Chicago and the parent of 2 CPS students. First, thank you, Dr. King. Even after painful cuts to custodians, crossing guards, and lunchroom staff, you put forward a balanced budget that protects classrooms. That is no small feat with a starting gap of nearly $750 million. What we continue to hear, some want CPS to make the MEBF pension payment and to borrow to do it. Whether you are elected or appointed, many of you have said trust with CPS families is broken and must be rebuilt. Your own budget roundtable showed that every single table that discussed MEBF opposed making the payment, and more than 3/4 opposed borrowing. Ignoring those voices does nothing to rebuild trust. It tells families you do not listen or you simply do not care. We've heard threats that if CPS doesn't pay, that the city might withhold TIF surplus. Some of you call that politics. Families call it what it is, extortion. Everyone knows the city is going to declare a large TIF surplus to help balance its own budget, and state law requires that CPS gets more than half of it. The idea that payment is the price of admission is fiction. We also need to be honest about the borrowing. The real reason the city wants CPS to borrow is to make the MEBF payment. The plan on the table is $200 million in short-term, high-interest debt, costing more than $300 million once fees and interest are added. That's the equivalent of $1,000 per
You have
student
30 seconds.
or 3,000 teachers. This new debt would also be shipped straight out the door to City Hall while weakening CPS's financial footing. The risk of credit downgrade, higher borrowing costs on existing debt, and classrooms paying the price for years to come. If borrowing were really about contingency planning, you would wait until after Springfield's veto session and city's budget process, reassess, and then decide whether to amend the district's budget. Rushing to borrow right now is about one thing, making the MEBF payment. Whether you plan to run for office again or you simply want to look your neighbors in the eye and say you did right by Chicago students, people will remember where you stood on this budget. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Juan Rangel, speaker number 8, who's here in person.
Good afternoon. I'm Juan Rangel, CEO of the Urban Center. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed budget. Although it is not ideal, this is the most honest and realistic CPS budget since that proposed by former CEO Pedro Martinez. Dr. King should be commended for presenting a responsible budget without a damaging payday loan, though we hope Dr. King won't suffer the same fate as Pedro. This hybrid board, made up of members elected by the people and those handpicked by Mayor Brandon Johnson, has an opportunity to stop punishing taxpayers and stop saddling future generations of students with crippling debt. This is especially important to me and my community, as the plurality of CPS students are Latino. Let's be clear, any such Brandon bailout would be paid for by future cuts to Latino student classrooms. That's unacceptable. You could be the board that finally takes direct responsibility for representing the interests of families and kids as promised by the law that created this body and not have to worry about City Hall politics. Now, CTU President Stacey Davis Gates likes to say that this budget is not a math problem, but rather a reflection of our values and a choice. It's actually all of the above. We can choose to ignore working families who say their taxes are already too high and just continue to tax them to fund pet projects like the Patronage Rich Sustainable Schools program, Or we can choose to do the responsible thing, make tough decisions, live within our means, and show real progress. Perhaps then, taxpayers would be willing to do more for CPS. Please have an honest conversation about your budget priorities, but don't cower to any bullying from special interests like CTU, who puts themselves before children and the people of Chicago. Communities have had enough of what feels like a continual shakedown of parents
Thank
and
you for your
taxpayers
comments. Please conclude.
instead of demonstration of our long-term hopes for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker, Emily Ayala, speaker number 9, who's here in person.
Hello, my name is Emily Ayala. I'm a CPS parent and CPS alum. I have been here a few times already, and I'm here again to ask to keep all of our options on the table, including the municipal fund, including the loan, in order to close this $734 million gap. If without these, we'd be resorting to budget cuts. If anyone here is against these options, I want to hear your proposed solutions. A simple no without any alternatives is just a yes to the disastrous cuts. A no without alternatives or solutions is just wasting time arguing with no clear path forward. Time is money, and we're losing out on both. I want to use the remainder of my time to sit in silence in grief of what our children are going through. We just had a mom crying up here over a loss. Every second we can see is another 10 million lost to our inaction and our incessant arguing.
You have 30 seconds remaining. Please conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Nelson Guru, speaker number 11, who's here in person.
President Hardin, Vice President Bautista, and board members. My name is Nelson Giroux, Chief Public Affairs Officer at the Chicago Public Education Fund. The FY26 proposed budget takes a balanced, pragmatic approach to closing the district's deficit while protecting students in classrooms now and in the future. CPS trimmed more than $250 million from department budgets, which comes at a cost to schools and principals who already note operational challenges. But this budget avoids reopening the school budgets principals and local school councils built months ago. Reopening those budgets now or in the future would be severely disruptive. Critically, this budget also avoids new operational borrowing. Approving a budget that closes operational deficits with anticipated borrowing is extremely risky. This kind of borrowing is not guaranteed to be successful, and if it is not, mid-year cuts become the only option left. Moreover, the cost of borrowing is threefold. First, the direct interest cost itself is equivalent to over 60 teacher positions a year. Second, the risk of a downgrade limits future refinancing opportunities, including those already assumed in this budget. Third, this would crowd out future needed capital investments, of which CPS has a backlog of more than $14 billion. As such, it is no surprise that borrowing is hugely unpopular.
You have 30 seconds remaining. Please conclude.
And CPS parents, fewer than 10% of whom support it. This budget includes no revenue from unidentified sources or unreasonable assumptions. It protects stability for students, families, and educators. It does not jeopardize the district's long-term finances. Opportunities will arise for collaboration to secure the resources CPS needs. That collaboration starts with approving this budget, which ensures a strong and stable start for this year. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Warren Wagner, speaker number 13, who's here in person.
Can you guys hear me? Good afternoon. My name is Warren, and I'm a teacher's assistant. In addition to my normal duties, giving support to students who need extra help in reading, keeping students safe at lunch and recess, covering classes, and more, last year I had the honor of advising our school's first ever GSA. Our GSA was a space where LGBTQ students and allies could support each other and just be themselves. We created art, did anti-bullying work, and started critical conversations in our school. For some of those students who don't have many safe spaces in their life, I was their trusted adult who they could rely on. So last month, when I was told I'd been laid off, my first thought was for my students. The trust, community, and safe spaces we had built were taken from them. Yesterday, those students who are trying to find their place in this world that's so often hostile to them started school without a crucial link in their support network. We can talk a big game about equity, but it's meaningless if we don't fund those commitments. Every summer, we nickel and dime our schools because districts with mainly Black and brown students like CPS have never been given the resources needed to thrive. And today, we face cuts to our SICAs and our custodial staff, cuts to hot meals, and the possibility of mid-year layoffs. The state of Illinois admits that to provide even an adequate
You have
education,
30 seconds
they
remaining.
owe
Please
CPS
conclude.
almost $2 billion. Meanwhile, the Trump administration handed out over $100 billion in tax cuts to billionaires just like that. But the Illinois legislature acts like there's nothing it can do to raise funding for the services we need. I asked the board today to reject that. Break the cycle of austerity, stand up for our young people. In this political moment, we need to be bold. That means including the pension payment for support staff,
Thank you for your
keeping
comment.
borrowing on the
Please conclude.
table, and fighting hard for funding. Our students and families are counting on it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next and last speaker from the public participation list is Monica Koizel, who's joining us virtually. Please press *6 to unmute yourself. Press *6 to unmute yourself, Monica. Monica Koizel, speaker number 15. Please press *6 to unmute yourself. Thank you. You can begin.
Hello. Just a moment here. I'm stepping out to take this.
You can begin, please.
Okay. There we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Koziel. Can you all hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes. Please proceed.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Going to bring this up. So I probably serve as a teacher in Chicago Public Schools. I've been teaching for the last 5+ years. And I'm here today because I was laid off in June of 2024 with the explanation that it was for budgetary reasons. And while I understand that budgets are challenging, I want to make clear that I had seniority over other staff who were retained. Additionally, just a few days after my layoff, I would have reached a tenure status. This raises serious concerns about whether CPS policies and contractual obligations regarding seniority and tenure were followed. And these budgetary restrictions cannot be used to sidestep the rights of educators who have committed their careers to CPS students. When decisions are made in this way, that disregards seniority, it erodes fairness, undermines teacher morale, and most importantly, disrupts continuity for students. I respectively request that my case be reviewed, including whether proper seniority protections were applied and that an equitable remedy be considered, whether reinstatement, back pay, another fair resolution. More broadly, I urge the district.
Please conclude.
Yes, I urge the district to ensure that budgetary layoffs are handled transparently and consistently with state law and union agreements. I remain deeply committed to CPS students, families, and communities, and I hope to continue serving them as I have for years. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your comments. President Hardin, we also have several elected officials who would like to address the board. Our first elected official is State Rep Ann Williams from the 11th District, who's joining us virtually. Representative Williams, please press *6 to unmute. State Rep Ann Williams, you can begin.
Hi there.
You.
Great. My name is Ann Williams, and I am a state representative on Chicago's North Side. I am here not as a representative of the Illinois General Assembly or the state of Illinois, but as a representative of my community who believes deeply in public education and has advocated for years for our neighborhood schools. During my tenure as state representative, I have fought along with many of the stakeholders in this room for education funding, and we've made some important strides forward. However, I think we all know there's a long way to go and significant ongoing challenges remain. As I've said before, there are no easy answers, no quick fixes. I'm certainly not an expert on CPS finances. However, I followed the annual CPS budget discussions for many years, and I know cuts are never easy, but sometimes there is no choice. I know budgeting for CPS and otherwise is often a series of difficult decisions. I've had to make them over the years. I listened last week to the entirety of the budget presentation, along with all your questions and insightful comments. And I want to commend Dr. King for proposing an equitable budget, which I do believe prioritizes students and rejects what I feel is a risky borrowing strategy in favor of long-term stability and investment. I just haven't heard another responsible and viable option. It's clear, though, the CPS budget team worked diligently to turn over every seat cushion, find every penny to avoid classroom impacts, and importantly, to maintain commitments to labor partners. That is not significant, and it, I'm sure, was not easy. But this approach is not sustainable over time. That's why I've said to many of you directly and otherwise that the collaborative work must begin to increase education funding across the board. And we must begin to address and at least talk about the structural inequities which have negatively impacted CPS for decades. These are difficult and complicated conversations which will need to take place in partnership with leaders statewide whose expertise on school funding far exceeds mine. Ultimately, you, the elected and appointed members of the Chicago School Board, are the ones making the hard calls and difficult choices here. I am all for fierce advocacy and standing strong for what you believe in. But playing the blame game via media talking points and tweets is not going to move us forward, and it's not going to get us where we need to go. However, adopting a stable, responsible, and cohesive funding plan is a key first step toward having the critical larger conversations we really need to have regarding the future of public education in Illinois. It's beyond time. I want to thank all of you for your commitment to the successes and the sustainability of Chicago Public Schools. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for your comments. The next elected official is Alderwoman Nicole Lee from the 11th Ward, who's joining us virtually. Please enter *6 to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Hardin, CEO King, and esteemed members of the Chicago Board of Education. I'm Alderman Lee from the 11th Ward. I'm here today because I wanted to be recorded as supporting the CPS proposed budget, which, while not perfect, is a responsible approach. And importantly, the CEO and her team have avoided cuts that would directly impact our students and classrooms. I also believe strongly that CPS must avoid new operational borrowing, including to cover the cost of the MABEF payment. While I understand that this will require the City of Chicago to identify revenue to cover the costs related to the non-teacher pensions, I believe that is the appropriate choice. Finally, I urge CPS to ensure that SEIU janitors who were laid off be given the opportunity to be rehired at the same rate of pay that they were already making. It's really just not fair to fire our workers and make them reapply for the same job at a lower pay. I appreciate the comments of State Representative Ann Williams as well, and look forward to working together with all lawmakers and board members to ensure that as we move forward, we have fair and equitable funding for education for all of the City of Chicago as well as the state of Illinois, as we work towards disentangling the finances of the city with the Chicago Board of Education. As such, as your elected board members, when you're fully elected, should have the ability to raise revenue on your own. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for your comments. The next elected official is Alderman Nick Spasaro from the 38th Ward, who's joining us virtually. Please enter *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, I believe I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Okay, well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you, President Hardin and CEO Dr. King and board members for giving me this opportunity to speak. I didn't prepare any specific speech or anything such as that, but I just wanted to make a few comments and just let you know a little bit about myself. Once again, I'm Alderman Nicholas Spasaro, Alderman of the 38th Ward. It's on the far northwest side. I'm a former public school student and also a parent and a 6-year LSC member, 4 as a parent and 2 as a community rep. Been an alderman for 14 years now, so I wanted to just say thank you all for what I feel you're doing the right thing right now. I know there's no easy answer here. There's only a wrong answer, and that wrong answer, I believe, is taking out a high-interest loan. So right now, we're keeping the schools open. Unfortunately, we all have to feel a little bit of pain, but we need to keep the schools open, keep our kids in school. Just wanted to say I commend you guys for coming up with a budget for now to hold us over, hopefully for the rest of the year rather than a couple months. And Dr. King, I just wanted to say to you personally, I had you all wrong. I was 100% wrong about you, and you've been a pleasant surprise to me. So keep doing what you're doing. God bless you. God bless everybody on that board. And hopefully we find a bunch of money and resolve all of this stuff. But thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for your comments. President Hardin, this concludes public participation.
Board members, are there questions or comments related to public participation? I do want to recognize Chief Mayfield, just so they can offer some clarity on some of the comments that have been made.
Thank you, Board President. This is mainly for the families and some of the comments that I heard earlier about the hot lunches. And I just want to clarify. I've actually been, at a few schools for the first 2 days. Again, we're on day 2 of back to school. So happy to see all the young faces and the kids returning to school. I also had the opportunity to touch base with our food service workers who work extremely hard every single day to make sure that nutritious meals are provided. And let me provide a point of clarification. Hot nutritious meals. So hot nutritious meals aren't going away. We still have hot lunches. And as a matter of fact, on day 2, we have served hot lunches again. Now, we had a handful of schools that had equipment issues based upon recent flooding, and we addressed those with cold lunches. But the team is ready to go and happy to serve hot lunches every single day. So I just want to reiterate that to parents and give them some reassurance that those hot meals are still on our plate. So thank you so much. Thank you, Board President.
Thank you, Chief Mayfield. There's one other point of clarification I want to make that has come up just several times. I think it's important just for both the board and the community to understand our perspective as we look at these very weighty decisions. It's been stated, over and over again that the city intends to balance its budget based on TIF surplus. And so I too had this assumption and was hopeful that our projections could rely on that based on the city's $1 billion projected budget deficit. Upon investigation, though, it is my understanding that the city has moved away from using TIF surplus as a means of balancing its budget. It engaged Ernst Young early this year to identify efficiencies and come up with strategies that allow them to be more efficient and move towards a means of not relying on short-term strategies such as TIF surplus to balance the budget. So I just think it's important to articulate what our understanding is, or at least what my understanding is, in talking directly with the city. As we make these assumptions, they have to be based on credible information. And so I thought it important that I reach out to the city directly to either confirm or have that premise rejected. And it turns out that that is not a strong basis for making the assumptions that were put forward. So I just wanted to use this moment to provide that clarity as it's come directly from the city of Chicago. Board Member Rivas.
Thank you, President Harden. I just wanted to also provide a clarification related to comments about our Acero Santiago school, which is not in my district, but it is in the Humboldt Park community, which is near and dear to my heart. Obviously, we had lots and lots of back and forth, and so many of our families here, and I'm really proud to have voted to ensure that we kept those schools open. I abstained from a vote related to the viability language, but the following vote related to that change, I voted yes. And as a board, we stand by our decisions. No matter the result, we have to stand by the choices we have made as a collective. So I'm very proud to stand with the Acero families, with our Santiago families, and I hope we have a resolution very soon to ensure that we can either purchase that building or ensure that we have that building accessible to them for years to come, because we do not want those families to have to deal with another school year of uncertainty. Thank you.
Member Blaze.
So I just want to acknowledge Vicki Willis, who was here and talked about her son and the challenges that he experienced due to cuts. And we have to be conscious of this. We feel the cuts just like I feel the cuts tremendously. When we're saying we're not making cuts to classrooms and we're patting ourselves on the back, it's not true. We are missing CCAS. We are missing safe passage workers. Things are changing and they're getting worse. We had more money during COVID and now it's gone. And here we are circling the drain again. Instead of understanding that when we had more money, kids were better off. The grades were going up. People were safer. The first thing to go is a restorative justice coach who teaches kids how to de-escalate and to think through their problems. So no matter where this budget goes, I'm not going to feel great about it. I also want to just underscore, I keep hearing payday loan, payday loan. Does anybody know what a payday loan is? They're at 20-30% interest. From the budget department themselves, they said the range is from 5 to 7%. It's not a payday loan, and nobody wants to take it. Trust and believe. If we thought that this board could get to the 2/3 vote and take a loan in order to stop mid-year cuts, we wouldn't have to put it in the budget right now. This board has been very clear that we can't get to that number in order to stop the cascade in the classrooms. So that's why we have to put it in right now. But anyway, thank you so much. And we are taking all of this in, and I appreciate everybody for coming out to make comments. Thank you.
Member Pope.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for your public comments. I want to try to reframe this issue in a certain way, and that is talking a little about what is responsibility. I am not a rich woman. I raised my family. I was the main breadwinner as a CPS teacher. I was able to purchase a house. I was able to do a large amount to help my children go through college, etc. And I didn't do it by being irresponsible. I am not an advocate of irresponsibility. However, I do think that it is irresponsible fundamentally to make assumptions about future income, about money that we will or will not get in record number quantities. I think we're talking about responsibility and people keep talking about it in terms of borrowing, but I think we have to look at what I think are kind of shaky underpinnings to this budget based on the assumption of how much TIF money we will or will not get. And that's what really concerns me, because if we have this assumption for a record TIF surplus and it doesn't come through, who is going to suffer? Our children in the schools are going to suffer. Our families are going to suffer. Our educators, our paraprofessionals, those are the people who are going to suffer. So I think we have to look at responsibility and say there isn't one simple definition of responsibility. And I would ask that the CEO and the budget team keep these considerations in mind.
Member Zakor.
I also want to thank everyone for coming out to speak today, and especially the parents. What I'm hearing from you so strongly is do not cut our schools. You are already cutting them too much. That's the same thing that I'm hearing from parents that I'm talking to in my community. Honestly, I've been asking them point blank, if we have to choose between taking out a loan and making cuts in our school, what do you think we should do? And every single parent I talk to says take out the loan, because they don't want our schools to be cut. I was a classroom teacher for many years, and a couple of times I had the absolute privilege of teaching electives to cluster students, and I know that I could not have done that without the SICAs in my classroom. So parents who are addressing the needs of our special needs students know that we really hear you and understand how important that is. I also want to just take a moment to address what's kind of an ongoing misrepresentation of what was stated in the community meetings about the MEABF payments. So the information that was presented to us actually said that of the 25% of tables who spoke about the MEABF payment, somebody at each table was opposed, not the entire table. So let's not misrepresent how many people out there are honestly even thinking about it, because no one that I've been talking to has that on their mind. They mainly want to see us keep cuts away from the schools, and they do want to see us support our lowest paid, mostly Black and brown female workers. Thank you.
Member Brown.
Thank you, President Harden. I want to just, what I'm interested in is since we inherited this crisis, from this, this moment forth, I would like us to be solution bearing. So I have a question. It's rhetorical, but thank you, President Harden, first for kind of dispelling that notion that there's some type of guarantee that there's going to be this huge TIF surplus, and that the city of Chicago is going to balance its budget based on that. Our commitment, before I get to my question, is to no more cuts in the classroom. Because when cuts generally happen, they hit the South and the West sides first. And historically, in this institution, that, we call them tough decisions, but usually the people making those tough decisions aren't the ones who are impacted with those tough decisions. We have to inherit those tough decisions. And my question is, what happens if city council members spend most of their TIFs dramatically reducing the TIF surplus. And I think any assumption that that will not happen is politically naive. I also want to say, for those, because we do not want to take out a loan, but we want the option to do it if state funds don't come through. Now, I say that as someone who is actively working to build state support. So I want to report to the public that we have another meeting this Thursday with school board members across the state of Illinois. Currently on board is Proviso, Highland Park, Berwyn 100, Berwyn 98, Oak Park, Skokie, District 59, East St. Louis, and there's more. Because my question is, well, what are you doing about it? Instead of just sound bites and taking shots at teachers and taking shots at the mayor. When those who have institutional memory remember when the Illinois network of charter schools were actively going in Black communities advocating for school closings. Where was all the outrage then? Remember school operators who had to drop their organization because of the scandals. Remember when there was an organization called the Renaissance Fund, and his job was going around advocating to Black parents why their schools were closed. The brother's name was Philip Hampton. I was one of the people that was in a group, and we chased him from meeting to meeting until they went underground and reemerged as Kids First. You need to beware the messenger. Because in Chicago, everything is political. People say we want to make it about children. Well, when I was in kindergarten and first grade, I went to school in Willis wagons. It's always political. Everything is political. So we want to make sure that there will be no cuts. Because the same people that are feeling outrage right now, I didn't see you when schools were being closed in Austin, when Douglas was being gutted from 600 students down to 34. I didn't see you on the South Side when schools were being shut down left and right. Because as long as I remember, excuse my slang, a nan teacher closed the school. And while you're heralding the person who just left this office, he left us with a $734 million budget deficit that he was never honest about, and no state strategy to address it.
Member Brown, can you
Yes, sir. Yeah,
comments?
Give me a second. So if I understand things correctly, we want the option to ensure there are no cuts. I agree with board members of CORE. The people I talk to say no cuts. They're not even thinking about an MEADF payment. They're not even thinking about it. They say no cuts, because that's what people feel. And so, excuse my intensity, brother. I'm gonna close my statement. But what I'm sharing is that I have institutional memory, because I was a person often locked out of these meetings. The parents I rode with were locked out of these meetings. It's not an intellectual piece. What is your solution if you are not in favor of it? Offer it, present it. And that's all I got.
Thank you. Member Custer.
Yeah, I appreciate so many of the board members using this opportunity as their platform when we're supposed to be commenting on our speakers. But, one of the issues that I'm having is that we talk about solutions, and we have a budget that is presented to us that is balanced. We have a budget that is presented to us that doesn't have more cuts in it. And what is irresponsible and what is not solution-oriented is the idea that your solution is to balance the budget, rework the budget on the backs of our students to help the city. We are a governing body of our own entity. We are responsible only for us. We are not responsible for what the city budget is. It's unfortunate that they're in this position too. Lots of places across the country are in this position where we're having to find money and make cuts and do different things. But this is our job right here. And balancing the budget on the backs of our children so that we can help out our mayor, that's not responsibility. It's not solution-oriented. We have a budget that has been presented to us that is balanced, that is for children, and that protects the classroom from further cuts.
Member Lozano.
Thank you, President Harden. I believe that none of us on this board really want to make any cuts in the classroom or to the students. I really believe in all of the board members, their hearts are there. But, you know, I know that this budget has a deficit, but I also know that we have a responsibility to our children. We have a responsibility to the city, because also the city is also balancing their budget. And it's not separate, because we're talking about, you know, balancing a budget of healthcare. We're talking about balance. All of this affects our children as well, and it affects the parents of the children and our families. So we have to take this all into consideration. I am just concerned too that, you know, special ed students or, you know, bilingual students that are already suffering and have never really gotten their fair share will be the ones that at the end of the day will be the brunt of this cuts if they are made. So again, there was a time where I was a single mom, and it was difficult to balance the budget. And there was a time that, you know, I had to refinance the house. But I did that because I had children and I had a responsibility. So to think that borrowing is a sin, it's not. Borrowing is so that you can pay later. And they're painting the interest rate like if it's going to be so much and for the future generations, but we're responsible for the kids that are in school right now. So we have to make sure that they have what they need. And then we know that we can pay off a loan over a long time, maybe 15 years. And we are fighting for state funding. And we're not going to stop fighting for it. And I have confidence we're going to get it. And once we get it, we can pay back the loan, and then we don't have a loan. So the fact that it's either one or the other, it's not a serious conversation. So I want everybody to remember, when you have to take out a loan, all of us have done it, and we've paid it off. And sometimes there's higher interest and less interest, but we figure it out. And this is an intelligent board that we can figure it out. So thank you.
Member Rosenfield.
Dr. King, if I could, I would award you with the Profile and Courage Award, because I know this isn't easy, and I really, really appreciate your values. Budgets reflect values, and we must prove we operate in the best interest of our families. This taking out a loan and paying the MEA payment helps the mayor politically, and it harms our students now and in the future. CTU historically at one time called the payments, quote, a shameful scheme to balance the budget of the city on the backs of CPS students. So that happened historically as well. We have a budget here that protects our schools. It's a responsible budget. It is not mortgaging our future, because although we have to take care of who's in the classroom right now, it is our fiduciary responsibility to take care of this district into the future. And perhaps most importantly, there is a city TIF policy. This isn't a personal decision. There is a city TIF policy that requires a certain amount of TIF to come to the board. It is not at the mayor's whim. It's not if we don't do that, then this happens. There's a TIF Act under state law. Any withholding of any TIF funds would be in violation of state law. So that's a ridiculous notion that because we did this, we're not going to get this. It doesn't work like that. We all are in this for the 325,000 kids. Somebody, I think it was Hal, that said the idea that the payment is the price of admission is ridiculous.
Member Lopez.
Thank you, Board President. I also do want to thank all the families, especially those that sometimes unfortunately had to take time off from work to be here, to make sure that their voices are heard. And I appreciate you. Gracias a las familias que se tomaron el tiempo de venir y a compartir sus ideas o su opinión sobre el presupuesto que ha presentado la CEO. I also want to share that we are in crossroads. When we look at history and we look back, are they going to remember us as protecting public education or as paving the way for those that seek to dismantle it. Budgets are moral documents. They reveal who we believe is worthy of investment now and in the future. And right now, too many families are worried. I've spent the last couple of weeks actively meeting with different groups in my district, also with principals, with educators. They're worried. And I also know that public education is crucial for our city, for our state, for our country. I know this because I lived it. As a first generation daughter of immigrants, I saw teachers and community leaders lift me up when resources were scarce. When I tell my story at schools and children say with pride, just like me, that connection is the promise of public education, an inheritance passed down not in wealth, but in opportunity. For many of us, our parents coming to this country was a ticket to opportunity. The education that we received, the public education we received, is the inheritance we received from our families. So we need to make sure we're protecting that. So every morning, especially yesterday, as I saw parents dropping off their little ones at school, giving them the blessing, la bendición. You know, placing the trust in us, in the school system. And that trust is important. We cannot betray that trust, especially in my community, when there's been individuals that have already broken that trust by mismanagement or funds and using Latino communities for their own advantage. We can no longer do that. So we gotta continue building that trust. So we're not here by accident. Our communities put their faith in us. Our vote later this month, it's more than just balancing numbers. It's about affirming whether every child, regardless of zip code or status, deserves great education. So let's choose to invest in our children, in our schools, and in the future of public education. Thank you.
This concludes our public participation segment. We now proceed with the fiscal year 26 budget presentation. Mr. Sikowski, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, President Harden, and good afternoon to the members of the board. My presentation will be about the FY26 CPS budget. I want to start with highlighting that this is a budget that protects our schools. Despite the challenges posed by our persistent revenue shortfalls, many of which have been mentioned here today, our growing costs and a deficit of $734 million, we have outlined a balanced $10.25 billion FY26 budget that will protect the progress made by our students. This budget fully protects the level of school funding from the previous year. It funds all of our contractual commitments to our labor partners. It delivers on the promise to stabilize school budgets, eliminating the risk of cuts to classrooms both now and later into the school year. It also includes only borrowing that provides current or future year savings to the district and is required for necessary capital investments. And this budget also allows for CPS to reimburse the city of Chicago for MEABF with new state or local revenues, unlike the FY 2025 budget that did not allow for this possibility. We felt a lot of urgency here today, and I still feel that in this room, and I want to talk a bit about meeting the urgency of the moment. First, we must protect our schools. This budget reflects many difficult decisions that were made in order to protect school funding now and into the future. Our schools are already underfunded. Putting schools at risk for cuts now or into the future sets us back even further and jeopardizes the over $1 billion in funding gains that we've made for our schools since 2019. We also need to provide families with certainty. Recent budgets have bolstered the confidence in the district and our financial future. We must maintain the confidence of our communities to build this progress. Last, we must refuse to go back. We've lived through years of forced austerity, and this budget takes necessary steps to protect our schools from reliving this past. Our budget proposal is also based on realistic expectations. First, on state funding, state lawmakers have expressed interest in partnering with CPS on long-term reform to address the underfunding issues, especially as we have presented a serious, balanced FY26 budget proposal. We heard from Representative Ann Williams earlier in this meeting, echoing those sentiments. However, state lawmakers have not committed to additional funding this year, and we cannot budget on unrealistic expectations. We've made this mistake in the past, and it's caused mid-year cuts, mass layoffs, furlough days, and billions in crisis borrowing that burden CPS today. On city funding, our expectation of additional TIF funding is reasonable. TIF surpluses have increased steadily in recent years, and TIF balances remain one of the few viable revenue options for a city facing $1 billion deficit. Withholding this funding from CPS would contradict established city policy, it violates state law, and would hurt CPS students. Lastly, we cannot risk our future. Taking out debt when it is not absolutely necessary will send the district into a downward spiral that will have a real impact on our schools. Borrowing money today at the expense of tomorrow has always been short-sighted. We did this a decade ago, and when the state was actively working on funding solutions for CPS, and it still resulted in downgrades, cuts, furloughs, and borrowing. No such proposals are under consideration today. Our $9 billion debt burden is already a drain on limited district resources. Taking on more debt when it is not needed compounds the financial pressures of the future and steals resources from our classrooms. Lastly, more borrowing may not even be possible. Banking on a risky strategy subjects our schools to the possibility of mid-year cuts. I want to come back to where we entered this conversation a few months back and talk about how we closed our $734 million deficit. Over the spring, we identified $165 million in deficit-reducing actions primarily related to departmental budget reductions. Once we completed these actions, we still needed to identify $569 million of additional strategies to balance this year's budget. The $165 million included the following. First, $146 million in department budget reductions, including a $48 million or 15% cut to central office spending and a $96 million or 6% cut to overall citywide spending. It also included $34 million in school-based grant strategies and programming adjustments, $12 million in savings from a more targeted process for fall enrollment adjustments implemented in fiscal year 2025, and $23 million in projected savings from the district's $40 million fund to stay within contractual class size limits. Because we preserved our teacher staffing levels, we project that the full $40 million will not be needed for schools with unique situations leading to oversized classrooms. During this phase of budget adjustments, we also identified two new liabilities adding to the district's deficit. First, $30 million that we have set aside in a reserve for new special education positions as new student needs are identified throughout the year, and $20 million required in a reserve for district-wide IT projects, some of which will save the district substantial money over time. At this point, we moved to the community engagement process. And in July, under the leadership of our interim CEO, Superintendent Dr. King, we spearheaded an extensive community engagement campaign to ensure that budget decisions were being driven by those who are most impacted by them. During the summer, we hosted information briefings, in-person and virtual feedback sessions, and an online survey where parents, students, educators, labor leaders, and community partners could grow their understanding of the district's financial situation and offer solutions on how best to reduce the deficit. Several themes emerged from these community conversations. By and large, CPS stakeholders said they wanted the district to do a few things. First, keep cuts as far away from classrooms as possible and avoid cuts that would diminish the overall student experience. Second, work collaboratively with state and local partners to identify new streams of revenue to support schools. Third, ensure a more equitable distribution of resources across schools. Fourth, resist any further borrowing that would drive up the district's existing debt. Fifth, forego the reimbursement to the city of Chicago for non-teacher pensions. And sixth, continue to engage the community around budget decisions. Where we landed in our budgetary solutions to protect our schools. Following these solutions and faced with the remaining deficit of $569 million, we've reviewed every line of our budget to develop a plan that protects our schools and our students. The strategies we're proposing to balance this budget include $126 million in additional savings away from the classroom, $149 million in additional available revenues, $29 million through accelerating debt refunding savings, $90 million in one-time funding sources, and $175 million from defining that the reimbursement to the city for MEABF is contingent upon additional state revenue, additional TIF surplus revenue, or other local resources above budget assumptions. First, on the additional cuts away from the classroom. In addition to the $146 million that was already cut from centrally managed spending in the initial round of budget adjustments, we identified $126 million in further savings in late July and early August, as outlined here. First, $50 million in savings from additional reductions to central office personnel, streamlining business operations, data teams, and professional development costs, and transferring some functions from the central office level to the network level to provide more direct support to schools. $29 million in savings from repurposing existing state and federal grant dollars to cover existing costs. $10 million in savings from a hiring freeze for central office staff, with the district only filling vacancies that are mission critical or revenue related. $10 million less for incubation costs for transitioning 5 Acero campuses to become CPS managed schools, as recent estimates have reduced this liability from $30 million to $20 million. $7 million in savings from delaying some centrally funded IT projects, $6 million in administrative reductions to departments and central programs that were substantially expanded during the COVID-19 pandemic, $5 million in savings from eliminating food and travel budgets for central staff, $4 million in savings from a negotiated increase in employee healthcare contributions for staff making over $90,000, $3 million in savings from reducing our marketing budget, and lastly, $2 million in savings from reducing the budget for non-union employee raises. Our next action was on additional available revenues. And after receiving favorable information from the state and reviewing all of our possible revenue options, we've identified $149 million in additional revenue to support gap closing. First, we're applying the $45 million from evidence-based funding above our initial projections. On August 1st, the state released their data for FY26 for all districts, which showed that we returned to Tier 1, the tier of schools furthest from funding adequacy in the state's formula. This gave us an additional $76 million in new funding for FY26, which represents an increase of $45 million above our previous projections. Second, we applied $25 million in projected grant carryover. And we project to have this remaining federal grant carryover available from FY25 to apply to FY26 expenses. Lastly, we increased our FY26 TIF revenue assumption by $79 million. We had initially assumed that the city would once again supply $300 million in TIF surplus revenue. At this point, we have increased our assumption by an additional $79 million to match the amount that the district received in FY 2025. Next, we are identifying $29 million through accelerating debt refunding savings. We are planning to issue $1.8 billion in new debt in fiscal year 26 to refund our existing debt and provide future savings for the district. This is a process that we do annually to take advantage of any opportunities for savings in the debt market. And the opportunity this year is higher, as many of the bonds that we issued at high interest rates in the mid-2010s are now callable and available to be refinanced at lower rates. The initial deficit of $734 million included the assumption of $100 million in savings, with additional savings targeted for future years. Based on our current deficit, we'll be accelerating $29 million of this savings initially targeted for FY27 to help close this year's budget gap. We've also identified $90 million in one-time funding sources, and we are leveraging these sources to avoid cuts, to avoid furlough days, and to protect our school funding. First, we're repurposing $65 million from our debt service stabilization fund. This is a short-term strategy to help avoid cuts to schools or borrowing, and we'll use up to $65 million in one-time resources from the account balance of this fund to close this year's budget gap. This fund was established as a reserve to assist with interim fiscal year debt service expenses and temporary liquidity issues. It has previously been fully depleted and used to assist with operating expenses, and due to recent investment returns, it has grown enough to allow us for this single use. Second, we'll be leveraging $25 million in existing philanthropic funding and continuing our approach to examine every dollar spent and received to determine options to keep cuts away from our schools. We're leveraging a major philanthropic donation that the district received in 2023. $25 million will help close the FY26 budget deficit. Lastly, this budget defines that the MEABF pension contribution reimbursement will be contingent on adequate funding. The FY26 budget defines that us reimbursing the city of Chicago for the MEABF expense is contingent upon us receiving additional FY2026 state revenue, additional FY26 TIF surplus revenue from the city, or other local resources beyond budgeted assumptions. This budget does allow us to make this payment, but it does require us to find the resources to do so. Without a dedicated revenue source for this cost, and given the financial challenges facing the district, we cannot make this reimbursement absent additional revenue without a short or long-term impact to our schools. I want to talk about how this budget fulfills our labor commitments as well. And the strategies taken to balance the FY26 budget ensure that CPS is able to meet all of our commitments to wages, staffing, and programming included in the district's labor contracts. On top of negotiated wage increases for our teachers, support staff, and administrators, this budget proudly commits to funding for new sustainable community schools, new dual language and world language programs, athletic programs, and additional librarians, tech coordinators, case managers, bilingual coordinators, and other important investments.
I'm sorry, the deck has to be updated. The incorrect deck was being shared. We are switching that out now.
Thank you. I believe we're on slide 17. Thank you. So want to just note that there's nothing materially different in terms of the numbers or the approach in this deck. I believe there were just some minor updates made last minute to some language here. So fulfilling our labor commitments, I want to highlight that this budget also avoids furlough days as a saving strategy, preserving staff wage gains and protecting the important work happening across the district. I want to discuss how this budget counts on realistic revenues in the form of TIF surplus funds. CPS has limited options to raise revenue and relies on a few key consistent revenue sources to continue our progress towards financial health and continued investment in our schools. While property taxes and state funding continue to grow and remain reliable sources of revenue for CPS, so does the amount of revenue diverted to TIF accounts that can be surplused. TIF revenues have grown by 266% since 2014, and balances now exceed $3 billion. There are two charts on this slide. The first shows the annual amount of property taxes collected in TIF accounts. We notice in 2024, based on recently published data, that we've seen a record high $1.25 billion that would otherwise be available to taxing bodies be collected by TIF accounts. And on the right, we see the fund balances that have grown to almost $3.2 billion in our most recent 2024 data. I also want to highlight that there is a city TIF policy, and in addition to the rapid growth of TIF collections and TIF surplus distributions, the distributions are governed both by state law under the TIF Act and by city policy through a 2013 executive order and an OBM policy adopted in 2019 and revised in 2025. What this policy requires is the city to regularly surplus unallocated amounts from TIF districts that meet the following qualifications: districts that are set to expire at the end of the following fiscal year, downtown or financial district TIFs, which represent a majority of the collections of TIF funding, districts containing industrial corridors, districts that are not created for a specific project or otherwise categorized as a neighborhood TIF. These unallocated funds in these TIF districts are surplused according to the following formula: all funds in expiring TIFs after the closeout date, the full balance of downtown TIFs, and then for all other TIFs, the city uses a tiered structure that surpluses 100% of available funds over $2.5 million, 75% of available funds between 1.5 and 2.5 million, 25% of available funds between 750,000 and 1.5 million, and none of the available funds under 750,000. There is also a state law regarding TIFs called the TIF Act. And beyond the city policy, the TIF Act under state law requires that monies not required, pledged, earmarked, or otherwise designated for payment shall be calculated annually and deemed to be surplus funds. Once a surplus is declared, the law guarantees that the funds be distributed in proportion to the percentage of property taxes collected by taxing agencies, with about 52% going to CPS and about 23% going to the city. This means that if the city uses TIF surplus to close its billion-dollar budget gap, CPS will automatically receive more than double that amount. I want to spend a minute talking about MEABF as well. The MEABF was established in 1921 to provide retirement benefits to qualified employees of the city of Chicago and non-teaching CPS employees. Illinois law obligates the city, not CPS, to cover MEABF funding obligations. Historically, Illinois statute required the city to contribute amounts that were substantially less than the actuarial determined amounts that would have kept the funded ratio in the fund from declining. And for nearly 100 years, the city did not request funding from CPS, and CPS did not pay the city for their obligation. Beginning in 2020, the city requested that CPS reimburse the city for a portion of their cost with the commitment of additional TIF surplus funding to help cover these costs. This additional funding did not always cover the cost, but during these times, CPS had available federal relief funding and made payments to the city totaling $60 million in fiscal year 2020, followed by $100 million in 2021, $175 in each of 22 and 23. CPS did not reimburse the city in 2024. State law is clear that the obligation for MEABF resides with the city and that the obligation to the fund must be met by the city. The city has an authorized property tax levy to raise funds to make this payment to the MEABF pension fund, and despite budgetary pressures and requests for increased funding from CPS since 2020, the city has not increased this levy to help cover costs, and CPS does not have the same authority to raise funding for this, hence the need for cuts or additional resources to be able to make this payment. In the spirit of partnership with the city, CPS would support a change in state law as long as CPS was given the authority similar to the city to raise revenues for this obligation. With that, I want to turn it over to our CFO, Miroslava Krug, to handle this portion of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Mike, and good afternoon, board members. As Mike mentioned, CPS had not including adding to the district $9 billion debt burden as a strategy to close the fiscal year 26 gap. A market for additional debt for budgetary relief may not exist as the district is already issuing $2.4 billion in new long-term debt this year, including $1.8 million to refinance prior debt and provide savings of about $129 million to reduce the district overall debt service costs, and $600 million in new debt for capital projects and to reimburse the district for capital expenditures already incurred. If CPS planned to borrow for budgetary relief but could not execute on the transaction, schools could be forced to make mid-year costs. Most importantly, borrowing for operation expenses would send the district into downward spiral of credit downgrades, higher interest rates, and steeper costs to staff, program, and services in the future. When CPS engaged in this type of borrowing between 2016 and 2018, the district received 34 credit rating downgrades between Moody's, S&P, and Fitch from a AA rating to junk. CPS is now paying nearly $200 million per year for this crisis debt. If CPS has access to this funding today, we could hire at least 2,000 additional teachers. So this graph, a little busy, but give you a sense on for what happened started in 2016 and how our credit rating is starting going down. And we have done a lot of progress. We received 34 downgrades. We only have gotten back 14 downgrades. And even though in 2015, we were investment grade, and you can see the dotted lines in the graph, we're still below investment grade. So borrowing for operation expenses likely to trigger a rating downgrade. Why? According to Standard & Poor's report on April 17, 2025, quote, we could consider a negative rating action within the one-year outlook period if the board fails to implement sufficient structural budget balancing measures in its fiscal year 2026 budget and pushes out significant budget imbalance into out years, resulting in recurrence of sizable operating deficits and materially weakened reserve and liquidity positions that are not longer commensurate with the current rating. Also, this week, 5 days ago, the S&P spoke to Bloomberg, and Bloomberg issued an article called "Chicago School Seeks $1 billion of Short-Term Debt, Cash Gone." And our credit analyst was interviewed, quote, "CPS structural stability appears to be on a downward trajectory. As such, any additional one-time solutions, such as short-term loans, would be viewed as temporary fixes that are unlikely to support long-term credit quality." So cost of the downgrade. Based upon conversation with CPS's advisors and underwriting firms familiar with CPS's debt portfolio, we expect such a downgrade would result in an increase in borrowing cost of at least 25 basis points per year on every dollar borrowed in 2025 and into the future. CPS is below investment grade, and the impact could drive our rating even lower. This will impact the $1.8 billion refinancing transaction necessary to produce $129 million in savings that is already included in the 2026 budget, the $650 million transaction plan for this fall for capital funds, the potential borrowing related to the MEABF payment, and all future general obligation transactions. refinancing savings declines an estimated 1.2 million for every 0.1% increase on CPS cost borrowing. Assuming a 0.25% increase in borrowing costs, the impact will be we will lose the 30 million in we will have $30 million lower in the refinancing savings, adding to our 2026 deficit. We will lose 13 million in fewer dollars available for capital in 2026. The need to borrow these amounts in addition to the MEABA contribution to overcome the 2026 deep deficit, and additional amounts borrow for capitalized interest to avoid future additions to the 2026 deficit, resulting from a larger borrowing to cover operating costs. So this chart gives you kind of a visual of what we're looking for. If we have to do a 200 million borrowing for about 15 years, it will generate annual interest increases by 12 to 46 million. And in 15 years, the total cost of the 200 million will be 24 million. That's about 1,240 teachers over a 15-year period. Because we will lose now, we have 30 million that the financing have opened in the deficit. We'll have to refinance about 43 additional millions to get back into being in balance and to make sure that we recover the 13 million that we lost in the capital funds. Will generate in an average 11.5 years about $6 million in annual interest, and then the total cost of that loan will be 70 million at the end of the term. So that means that for the 243 million, we will be looking at the end of these loans at about 394 million. So why do we expect that the risk can be even much higher? CPS's market penalty for not being AAA, which is the highest rating, issued in recent months have been approximately 145 points to 160 basis points, as measured by evaluating the price investors pay to buy to sell from each other. CPS saw market penalties in 2015 and 2018 that were 2 to 3 times this amount. CPS is now paying nearly 200 million per year for this crisis debt. Even with a half decade of very strong financial performance, CPS struggled with market credibility, given the legacy of financing for operating expenses a decade ago. The penalty charged by investors could be much higher. So CPS is already facing large deficits in 2027 and beyond. And what we're looking into doing is a scoop and toss, effectively borrow money today instead of making the December 2025 interest payment, shifting repayments obligation off to the future with the paying of additional high-cost interest due in those years. As I mentioned, the total impact of the proposed 200 million in financing today creates 400 million of additional budget gap to overcome in future years. CPS, on an annual basis, borrow between $600 and $650 million for capital, so that will be creating a compounding impact. To avoid a loss of purchasing power, future capital borrowing will suffer a 25% basis points increase in borrowing costs, increasing interest costs by an estimated 37 million for each new financing. This increment accumulates with each year CPS issues new capital bonds. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So this proposed FY26 budget makes long-term progress on our deficit. At the start of our budget process this year, we projected deficits reaching nearly 1 billion in 2027 and exceeding that in future years. After closing this projected 26 budget deficit in a responsible manner that protects schools and protects our labor commitments, our long-term budget outlook is improved by $468 million in FY27 and by similar levels in future years. Actions we've taken to balance this budget reflect a net $263 million of structural deficit relief, primarily from structural cuts to district spending away from the classroom and increased structural funding from the state. Because this budget defines that reimbursement to the city for MEABF is contingent on additional TIF surplus revenue or additional state revenue above budget assumptions, future year deficits are reduced by another $175 million. Lastly, our jump back into Tier 1 of the state's evidence-based funding formula earlier than expected adds another $30 million to projected revenue increases in FY27 and beyond. Here we are showing what our previous 5-year forecast was prior to us issuing the proposed FY 2026 budget. You see the $734 million deficit in fiscal year 26 that grows to north of $1.3 billion by fiscal year 2030. Based on the actions that we've taken in this budget, we have closed the FY 26 budget gap and reduced our FY 2027 deficit to $520 million, almost cutting it in half from what it previously was. To recap, over the last few months, we've worked hard to close a $734 million budget cap and propose a budget that protects our schools both today and into the future. This budget fully protects the level of funding for schools from the previous year. It funds all of our contractual commitments to our labor partners. It delivers on the promise to stabilize school budgets, eliminating the risk of cuts to classrooms both now and later into the school year. It includes only borrowing that provides current or future savings to the district and is required for necessary capital investments. Lastly, it allows for CPS to reimburse the city for MEABF with new state or local revenues, unlike the FY 2025 budget that did not allow for this possibility. Following these hearings, we will be presenting the balanced FY 26 budget at the Chicago Board of Education meeting for approval on August 28th, 2025. With that, happy to take questions.
Member Blaze.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for your presentation. Once again, we've got a budget presentation here that spends a lot of time on what the city TIF funds and on other things, but we don't really dive into what cuts are happening. So 126 million in central office. I'd love a slide that actually breaks that down. Is it not new hires? Are we firing people? What people are we firing? What do the cuts that you are creating actually look like? This feels, I don't want a budget presentation with a bunch of paragraphs and words. If we could get some real data, that would be very, very helpful for me. And I think someone told me that CPS is the biggest purveyor of junk bonds. Was that in the country, right?
Yes, we are.
Yes. So we're protecting, so we're at junk bond status now. If our credit goes down, what's under junk bond status?
Where we can continue to go down and continue to be junk bonds, but what it changes is we're going to be paying more and more and more. No different than your credit score. You have a very good credit score, you pay less. If your credit score goes back past the midpoint to get towards the end of the line, you will be paying more, and you will have more restrictions because
I worked for a BCD mortgage lender. And like A credit, B, C. I worked for a lender that lent money to people with really bad credit. And you get to a certain point, and either you don't get any money or you get this bad credit rating. So there's that. So if we're the biggest purveyor of junk bonds, we're protecting our credit rating, that seems again disingenuous to me. So anyway, if we could get some budget numbers that actually break down these little bullet points that say we're gonna take 125 from here and 125 from there, and actually give us the meat and potatoes of what those cuts mean. Because people in central office are wondering what's happening. They're wondering what's going on with their jobs. There are, I know, we made 10% cuts to all of our contracts, but that came on the backs of all the school bus drivers that we barely got back after COVID, and we still don't have bus service for a number of students. So if I can get a few more specifics from your next presentation, that would be super helpful.
Yes, thank you. So a few things here. The $126 million we do have spelled out on the slides that I presented today. Some of those items are self-explanatory, like a central office hiring freeze, or like the elimination of our food and travel budgets. There's some items that are still in development as well. Regarding transportation, we did add about $80 million back to this year's budget to make sure that we're able to fund transportation for every student for whom it is required. We've also posted our budget available on our website, and I know we've been here for over 2 hours already, so we tried to distill the presentation down to some of the important facts, but all of our budget is fully available on our website and has been since last Wednesday, including the data behind every one of our departments and every element of our $10.2 billion.
And it's the public presentation, and we want to make sure that the public has all the information.
Thank you.
Member Lopez.
Thank you, Board President. Hi, Mike. Speaking of document, about 270 pages, so still trying to get through it. So I do have several questions regarding different items in this budget. I will start first on regarding the multilingual, multicultural education, more than anything, just clarification that I'm understanding the information and the public, since it's available to the public, that they are also understanding the information provided there. And as most individuals, or if you don't know, interesting data is that we have roughly about a little bit over 88,000 of our students are considered English learners, roughly a little bit more than 1/4. Had a question in regards to the funding. One, definitely great to see that there's going to be more investment in the funding, at least what is being proposed. There's an increase. I noticed that there are 3 positions that are being cut from last year, which were 56 to 53, and these are under the local funds. Are those in administrative positions?
So I can get back to you with that information. I don't have that in front of me right now, but I am taking a note now.
Okay, perfect. And then also, I noticed in the budget at schools, there was an increase of positions from 429 to 511. And just a little more information, it's my understanding with having spoken with the many individuals across the 7th district, as I do have several also dual language schools that families, love to send their kids to. There were some positions shifts. I believe the dual language coordinators, that those positions might have been removed or renamed into different positions now that to allow for the budget. Can you just clarify that? Because I was a little bit confused, and there seems to be confusion with also some of those schools.
Yeah, so the dual language coordinators and the English language program teachers are 2 roles that serve largely the same function. And so as we have expanded greatly into our English language program teachers, some of those roles that were previously defined as dual language coordinators are now defined as English language program teachers to reflect the expansion of this type of position.
Okay, and for the second position, that is based on the number of students, right, that English learners are per school?
Correct.
And is it about like every 300 students or so?
I believe it's less than that, but I can get you those exact ratios.
Okay. With individuals that had to be switched from one position to another within their school, are they also expected to still maintain the responsibilities of the coordinator plus the responsibilities of the new position at the same pay?
I believe those functions are largely the same now for both the dual language coordinator and the English language program teacher. So
Okay. Just want to make sure, that it's again a program that in having dual language support English learners is important, but that we have, the resources to support those teachers, educators, and the families, so it's successful. The other item is regarding on page 158, and this is special education. So I noticed that on page 158, overall for the general funds, there was an increase, but for the budget at schools, there was an increase from last year. Do you know what might have led to that?
Yeah, so we see an increase substantially from the start of the year to the end of the year in special education funding provided to schools. And that's as new students arrive or new IEPs get written with additional minutes. We are constantly reviewing and allocating additional both teachers and paraprofessional staff to make sure we're meeting the required minutes as those evolved. One thing that we've talked about over the last few months is that we see an increase in required minutes over the course of the year. So what we see over the course of the year is also a commensurate increase in budget.
Okay, just want to make sure that, and my understanding says this is budget at the schools as we move through the school year, and that there might be more needed support that we keep in mind since the number's lower than the previous year.
Yeah, and I'll add that there's an additional $30 million budgeted for these increases this year, and if our student needs happen to exceed that, we will make sure to meet those needs. We've already added over 100 positions since the budget was finalized as student needs have evolved, and we're seeing students show up and even as soon as this week. So.
Okay, perfect. And then regarding safety and security, looking at this budget, in particular, our previous conversation about safe passage, does the numbers included in this proposed budget, is it assuming that we're gonna get the money from the city this year?
So no, this does not assume that we will get the money from the city this year.
Okay, thank you. And it's something I know that I also had requested more information as to the reason why we haven't received those funds previously. And then I did notice also that in this, again, page 168, for the general fund in overall grand total, there was a large decrease based on 2025 ending budget to the proposed budget. And I'm referring to, we're looking at 71 million, what was 2025 ending budget, but in 2026 proposed budget, we are asking for close to 56.
And this is for which department?
Safety and security.
Okay. I will have to take a look at that and get back to you on that.
Okay, perfect. And then final category is regarding the fund. It was, you've mentioned 65 million that we're planning on utilizing as, and I agree with this. Pretty much a one-time short strategy while we need to focus on the long strategy. But it was in the presentation in the slide 26. It mentioned about our, our rating and the impact that it can have when taking into consideration using short-term fixes. If we we reuse the 65 million, will that have an impact on our rating?
No, board members. So this fund was created especially after the crisis in 2015, 16, 17, and one will say 18. There was a resolution from the board to make sure that the district created this reserve in order to make sure that we have enough liquidity to pay for debt service. In those years that the liquidity was very, very low. Currently, when we use that, when the fund, which is the debt service fund, produce interest, especially in the last 2 years, that interests are being very high, we return those funds back to the general fund to pay for debt service. So the funds are always used to pay for debt service, and it helps with the current liquidity issues that we have. So we used the fund and we were left us with 65 million, and the policy allowed us to use this as a one-time fund to help the budget. So now we depleted the fund. We put the last 65 million in the budget, and now we have to wait until the debt service generate more funds, and then it gets used into the debt service, or we will use it in the future because it takes time to build again if we need it for the budget. But this is allowed within the policy that was created in the early 20s to protect payments of debt service.
Roughly how long would it take us to get it back to the money that we're using?
Well, interest rates are going down. So in the last 2 years that we have interest rates that they were very, very high, we were able to create about $80 million in the fund, because remember, we have to deposit our debt service a year ahead of time. So it's about $800 million that we deposit in a fund. So we have about, average of 7 months that we can generate income. Now the interest rate is going down again, so we're not going to be generating revenue as fast as we did in the past.
Thank you so much. That concludes my questions. Thank you.
Member Zakor.
Okay, I have 2 questions unrelated to each other. And sorry, I didn't write down any slide numbers. But in one of the slides, maybe about halfway through, you were talking about how we are already going to be borrowing $2.4 billion, and there was kind of no discussion about that, but a whole lot of discussion about borrowing an additional $200 million, which is like 8% of that. So can you just maybe explain why that 8% additional is so dramatic compared to the $2.4 billion? That's my first question.
Sure. So the $2.4 billion in borrowing that was authorized by the board in May of this year has 2 components to it. The first is $1.8 billion to find refunding savings. So this is us refunding debt that was issued at high interest rates about 10 years ago to provide savings both this year and into the future for the district. The other $600 million of that is for capital expenses, which is our routine borrowing to make sure we're investing in our buildings and combating that $14 billion backlog of deferred maintenance that we have. The difference between additional borrowing beyond that would be for deficit relief, is, as our CFO mentioned earlier, this would represent a scoop and toss, where we're borrowing for current year expenses and pushing those obligations out into the future and increasing future year deficits. Chief Krug, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
Yeah, I guess I don't equate the 1.8 million in refinancing as borrowing, but thank you for clarifying that. My other question just relates to something Board Member Lopez asked about, because my understanding is actually that ELPTs and dual language coordinators are not anything similar. Every school with a certain population of English language learners has an ELPT, and their job is to, make sure students are in the correct classroom. They provide professional development to all the teachers in the school who are, providing services to EL students. They, step into classrooms to make sure that's happening. They do access testing, all those kinds of things. Dual language programs are total immersion that affect every single student in the school, and it's really quite different. So I guess I'm not understanding how those 2 things have now become the same.
Thank you. So we'll make sure to get clarity on that. I don't believe our chief of OME is here, so we'll get clarity on that.
Okay, I'll close this out with my comments and SAS questions. Again, as the city has moved away from using TIF surplus to balance its budget, I think the principle, first off, this is an ideal budget. It's fantastic on its face. It checks all the boxes. I think the concern that board members have raised is what happens if the TIF assumptions that are in the budget aren't met. Considering that the budget is moving away from using TIF surplus as a means of balancing a budget, it appears that the premise that undergirds this projection has some flaw to it. And so, part of the first question is, what happens in the event the TIF assumptions that we're basing this budget on aren't met? What's our contingency?
So we believe that this is a reasonable assumption based on the fact that our TIFs have continued to collect more money each year. We've seen the $1.25 billion that was collected in 2024, that was a record high. Also is a record high of $3.2 billion in claimed TIF balances. So property taxes that have already been paid. There's also the governance policies around city policy and state law.
I don't mean to interrupt, Mike, but all those things were stated in the presentation are tracked. And I'm with you. That's an ideal scenario. What I'm asking specifically is, if that is not hit, what is the district's contingency plan specifically?
So,
Contingency.
thank you. Yeah, every budget is based on assumptions. We have information now that gets better over the course of the year. Most of the time, those assumptions hold firm. There's times where those deviate. We saw in 2025 that the district overprojected PPRT funding by about $90 million. We recalibrated mid-year. We did not make cuts to schools. We made adjustments to some department budgets and some spending that was not entirely necessary, a lot of which is reflected in some of the cuts that we made this year as well. So if the assumption does not materialize, that's something we'll keep a close eye on and be ready to take appropriate actions that are required there.
Are those actions what we're interested in, though, is a contingency does not impact classrooms. And so I think where we're driving, and I'm just going to say it plainly, is there can't be a scenario by which we get to a point and there has to be cuts to the classroom. And so, you know, I think just through all of what has been shared, again, this is an ideal budget. Even the talk of debt restructuring, which is different from a loan, the talk of such is break glass in case of emergency. It is not a first strategy that the board is pursuing or members of the board are pursuing. So I just want to clarify that what we are seeking, and I think it's across the board, is confidence that we don't arrive at a scenario for which we don't have a contingency. So you don't have to address it now, but that is what is surfacing. If it is not short-term debt restructuring, then what is it? What assurance will we have that we won't be at this spot? And then just the other point is you're offering confidence that this is realistic, but the commentary we continue to get from the city is that our TIF assumptions are not committed. And so if the city is saying that we're not committing to that level of TIF, despite what our projections may suggest, that creates a space of ambiguity that is concerning, right? Now, we want the city to come through with record levels of TIF. We want TIFs to be expired, and we experience the windfall that we need in order to adequately fund everything. The reality is, based on timing or other issues, it may not come through. So I'm just going to implore upon UCO and budget to think through what is our case, what is our scenario, what is our position if TIF assumptions don't come through, because we've already said the state, from a timing perspective, is not going to meet our obligations. So what happens if the city, for whatever reason, does not meet our obligations? The district has to be in a position to protect its own assets, which are its children.
Yeah, and I think this is where we're encouraged by the mayor's commitment to allow TIFs to wind down and continue to surplus some of the record funding that's come into these TIFs. This also creates a space for advocacy as well to make sure that we're able to deliver on the budget that we've balanced with the $734 million deficit.
I appreciate the response. We need to see something hard and fast in the budget that offers that protection. Thank you for your presentation, Mike.
President Harden, can I add a comment?
Certainly.
Thank you, President Harden. I think also we would need to see what is that plan that the city is saying that they will do and they will not use TIF. Because under the current conditions, the city already have certain amount of TIF in their budget. So if they're saying we're not going to do enough, that means that they're going to be taking certain amount of TIF out of their budget, plus the deficit that they have ahead of them. If they're going to do that, then we also need to know what is the strategy the city is going to do in order to really be able to lift off that TIF from their budget and our budget and Cook County and Park District and city colleges and everybody else that is part of the taxing, but receive this from all of the taxing bodies. So that will be good to know, because then we collectively can have a plan. Because just the city saying, I'm not going to give you this TIF when everybody knows how the TIF works and what are the mechanisms of the TIF is not good enough because it will come. And it
No,
has
so
come. This is the largest years that we have.
Let me correct that statement because that's not accurate. Certainly not what I'm suggesting, that the city is not providing any TIF. So I don't want that to be the case. What I'm saying to you very plainly is the board, the district needs to have its own means if those things don't come through. That's simply all I'm saying. And yes, you're right. There needs to be more direct discussion with the city to understand their strategies and what it is that they're planning to do, which quite frankly underscores the reason why I'm expressing some concern, because there's still a lot of room for more discussion to ensure that we have a solid commitment for that TIF allocation. And so for me, it's just not enough. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board, speaking as Sean Harden. It's not enough to bake this in as our means of balancing the budget without having an IGA or at least some form of commitment from the city. I think that is what is fiscally responsible. So we can continue this discussion. I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? If not, this concludes the first section of the budget hearing. Thank you all very much.